May our prayers come before you, O God, as incense, and may your presence surround and fill us, so that in union with all creation we might sing your praise and your love in our lives. Amen. A reading from Exodus. Don't steal. My brother Jesse and I have only had one real argument as adults. I mean the kind where you yell and pound the table and point fingers. And it happened when we were playing a board game, Settlers of Catan. You don't need to know how to play. Actually, you do, because it's a really great game. But for the sake of this story, just know that part of the game is trading resource cards. For example, I'll give you 3 bushels of wheat for 2 piles of wood, that sort of thing. On the night in question, Jesse made such an offer to my wife, Kristen. Now, if I recall right, Kristen was in a tight spot. She had absolutely no bricks, which is like the death nail in Settlers of Catan. Realizing how much she needed bricks, Jesse decided to make her an offer. In exchange for 1 brick, he wanted 4 sheep and 2 bundles of wheat, which is an outrageous price. Come on, I said. That's ridiculous. Hey, he replied, if she's willing to trade, there's nothing wrong with it. Besides, stay out of it. It's not your business. But you're taking advantage of her rough situation, I replied. My voice grew louder. And you're hoodwinking her. I pointed and then pounded the table. I didn't know it, but I was accusing my brother of breaking the 7th commandment. As an aside, implying Kristen was being hoodwinked and wasn't capable of defending herself meant I was probably breaking the 8th commandment, but that's a discussion for another day. I suppose you could say that technically Jesse wasn't stealing. He didn't take Kristen's sheep without her permission. It was merely the free market at work, which my libertarian brother likely told me. But I think that's too narrow of a look at the commandment. Martin Luther said, "To steal is nothing else than to acquire someone else's property by unjust means." Luther would say you don't have to be a robber in the night or a Bernie Madoff to steal. You just have to acquire someone else's goods or services unjustly. And that could cover a whole lot, which makes this commandment way more challenging than criminal burglary. $9 t-shirts made by poor Bangladeshi garment workers? Is that just? What about home health care aides or daycare workers who need food stamps to survive, or beef prices which double overnight if pork is recalled? We live in a world of complex economics where each of us has very little to say over how much the makers of our smartphones get, for example. But does that mean that we aren't complicit in the unjust ways their labor is obtained? It's hard, isn't it? All right, time for discussion. Can you think of an example of goods or services being acquired unjustly in our world? And who's responsible for that? I want you to get in groups of 4 or 5, something like that. Make sure no one's left out. Introduce yourself to each other and ponder that tough one together. Where do you see goods or services being acquired unjustly? Ready? Go. All right, I'll ask you to wrap it up here. You'll have one more question, so if you want to finish your thought in that one, you can. Back to the board game story. In my righteous anger at my brother for breaking the 7th commandment, I failed to see an opportunity for me to keep the commandment. See, Luther, as we've mentioned, always takes these negative commands, do not steal, and interprets them positively. In this case, Luther tells us we are to not acquire our neighbor's goods unjustly, but we are to help him to improve and protect his property and means of making a living. Or in this case, help her. If I remember the fateful Settlers of Catan game in which Kristen was being persuaded to trade her life savings for a brick, I happened to have plenty of bricks that night. Had the commandment actually been on my mind, had I been as interested in my own keeping of the commandment instead of just Jesse's breaking of it, I could have offered a fairer trade to Kristen. 1 sheep for a brick, or something like that. In this complicated world, this is something liberals and libertarians, poor and rich, young and old, can all still do. Look out for one another, Luther is saying. Support each other in making a living. Seek to lift each other up. Be fair. Don't take advantage of each other. Let's do another discussion time. Have you seen that happen in life? Have you seen someone go out of their way to lift another up? Done like the exact opposite of stealing, but support, help one another in their lives. Share with one another. Go. All right, I'll give you 10 or 15 seconds to wrap it up. All right, we'll finish up the final thought on this board game analogy. A final thought. While my brother and I barbed over whether a commandment was being broken that night, I found out later our wives were always content to find ways of keeping the command, even in this game. They had this weird habit of playing a two-player version of Settlers of Catan without ever trying to win. They'd make all these fair trades, they wouldn't get into each other's turf, and they would just see how much of ethical Catan they could settle together. When I found out about it, I thought, that seems boring. But come to think of it, they sure had fun doing it, and I think they enjoyed each other more in the process. Amen.